Okay, another video for the GCSE students on the Weimar Republic, the basics of the Weimar Republic, essentially how the Weimar Republic worked, how it was organised, etc., and how it operated. Obviously, the Weimar Republic is something that Year 10 you've been looking at very recently, and Year 11 it's something that you really do need to know about for the Germany topic, the Germany exam. So I'll get straight into it. The Weimar Republic, the first thing that you really need to know and need to understand is that the Weimar Republic is a brand new system of government in Germany. Germany, before this point, before the Weimar Republic is established and set up, they've been ruled by the Kaiser, which, you know, up until November 1918, they've been ruled by the Kaiser, who has had supreme power. He has been the one person in charge. They haven't had a democratic system of government. They haven't had a parliament. So up until November 1918, Germany has been ruled by the Kaiser. And they've done relatively well out of it. As you remember, or you should remember, from before the First World War, Germany has become one of the most powerful countries in Europe. You know, one of the most powerful countries in the world. Under the Kaiser. So clearly, until the First World War, a lot of Germans, or most Germans, would say, yeah, it works having a Kaiser, you know, because clearly, you know, we're doing pretty well out of it. So it hasn't seemed like a bad idea. This is not, you know, a country that's crying out for democracy and crying out for a brand new system of government like we've seen in other countries in Europe, like Russia, for example. You know, for most Germans, having a Kaiser has been seen as an acceptable and successful form of government. Now, of course, the results of the war lead to the Kaiser's abdication and naturally the subsequent formation of the Weimar Republic. So how did this brand new system, this Weimar Republic, work, this brand new system of government? Well, there are three main parts to it. It's quite a complicated system, but essentially there are three main parts to it. You've got the president, you've got the chancellor, and you've got the Reichstag. So I'll start with the president. Now, the president was elected every 7 years in Germany. But their job was fairly minimalist, if you will. They took a back seat to the governing of the country, really. They didn't do an awful lot they didn't do anything really in terms of day-to-day governing. They left most of that job up to the Chancellor and to the Reichstag. The President only really stepped in and got involved in politics, really, when there was an emergency or a crisis. As well as, obviously, they do have the important job of choosing the Chancellor, who I'll talk about more in a second. But arguably the most important aspect of the German presidency, the job of the president, is something known as, which you should remember, Article 48. Now, Article 48 gives the president, in an emergency, the power to bypass the Reichstag so that decisions can be made immediately. You know, you haven't got debates and arguments and decisions being delayed because the Reichstag are busy arguing and negotiating it. The president can just, through Article 48, go, right, here's what we're doing, and we're doing it now. Doesn't have to, as I say, the Reichstag don't debate it, they don't argue it. It just happens straight away rather than over weeks and months or even longer. The next important part of the Reichstag is the Chancellor. Now, the Chancellor, as I mentioned before, is chosen by the President, usually from the biggest party in the Reichstag, the party that's got the most seats. The Chancellor was essentially in charge of the Reichstag, you know, suggesting laws, etc., suggesting policies and things like that. So they're a very, very important part of the Weimar Republic, and they do, as I say, the day-to-day governing of the country. They're really the person who's making the decisions, apart from, obviously, in an emergency when the president is stepping in. Thirdly, the Reichstag. Now, the Reichstag is essentially the German version of our House of Commons, okay, their parliament. It's full of politicians who've been voted into power. They will debate and pass laws, okay, so it's very, very similar to our House of Commons. Now, I will start with some strengths of the Weimar Republic. Now, the biggest strength, really, of the Weimar Republic was that it was very democratic. And what I mean by that is all men and women in Germany over the age of 20 could vote. Didn't matter, as I say, you know, what gender you were. Didn't matter whether you were employed or not or anything like that. All men and women over the age of 20 in Germany could vote. And their votes very much counted. I'll come back to that later. Because you're probably thinking, what on earth do you mean by that? Don't all votes count? Well, they do, but I'll explain why their vote very much counts in a minute. So that's the real strength of the Weimar Republic. It's very, very democratic. Everybody has a say. Everybody can vote over the age of 20. And as I say, their votes very much count, as I'll come on to in a minute, because that's also a bit of a weakness in it, or quite a big weakness. Speaking of weaknesses of the Weimar Republic, what were they? Well, there were quite a few weaknesses with the Weimar Republic. I'll go into some of them now. Arguably, the biggest, or one of the biggest weaknesses with the Weimar Republic was that the Reichstag was elected using a system called proportional representation. Now, you'll probably remember from this, you should remember from this, proportional representation is basically for every percentage of the seats you get that percentage. So for every percentage of votes you get, I should say, you get that percentage of seats. So if you win 5% of the overall vote, you get 5% of the overall seats. If you get 1% of the overall vote, you get 1% of the seats. Now, this led to the Reichstag being full of different parties, loads of different parties, who naturally all had different views. So you've got this building full of loads and loads of different people who all have different views. In our parliament, we only tend to have 5-6 parties in there, mainly. In Germany, you've got 20 odd. All with very different views. Obviously, if they had the same views, they'd all be part of the same party. So clearly, you've got a building full of loads of different people with loads of different views. And therefore, trying to come up with laws or rules for Germany is very, very difficult because they're constantly arguing. One party will say, right, here's an idea. And most of the other parties are going to go, no, I don't agree with that. We don't agree with that idea. We've got a better suggestion. So there's lots of disagreement, loads of disagreement in the Reichstag, and it's very, very hard for things to get done. Not only that, but this system of proportional representation basically ensured that you would never ever have a majority government, i.e. you would never get a party with more than 51% of the seats. So you're not going to get the electorate, you're not going to get everybody in Germany voting for the same party. You're not going to get 51% of the population voting. I mean, the example that I think I've used in class is in the UK in 1997, the Labour Party under Tony Blair won a huge majority in our House of Commons. They got 418 seats out of I think 659 there were. So huge majority of the seats, huge majority government. But even then, the Labour Party only got 43% of the national vote. So 57% of people didn't vote for Labour. So more people didn't vote for Labour than did, but still, Labour ended up with a huge majority. Because we use a system called first past the post. We use a different voting system, and that's why usually we end up with majority governments. It's rare that we end up with minority governments or coalitions, but it has happened quite recently. Obviously, if we'd used proportional representation in that year, in 97, well, Labour would have only got 43% of the votes and they would have been in a minority. So as I say, it really, really makes it difficult for all the parties to, for things to get done because parties aren't going to agree with each other. So it's very hard for agreement, very hard for things to get done. And it's why the president, particularly in times of trouble and emergency, finds himself having to use Article 48 quite a lot because nothing's getting done. There's just argument and argument and argument, and he's having to step in and go, right, forget it, here's what we're doing. The Reichstag are very rarely agreeing on things, especially at times of crisis and times of emergency. So naturally, people inside and outside of Germany look at this Weimar Republic and think, well, it doesn't work. This Weimar Republic doesn't work because either nothing's getting done or one person is still making all the decisions through Article 48. So a lot of Germans, particularly on the right, thought that the older system of one man being in charge or one person being in charge, like the Kaiser, was a better system. And therefore, thinking ahead, thinking to what we know happens in Germany over this period, thinking ahead, that's why a lot of Germans actually like, Hitler's idea of, well, I'll be the one man in charge, because a lot of Germans go, oh, just like it was under the Kaiser, one person in charge, you don't have endless debate, you don't have this democratic system that isn't working, and therefore, Germany will operate again and things will actually start to get done. So that is a very, very basic look at the Weimar Republic. There are more things that you know from that are in the textbook and in your exercise book, but that's the general gist of the Weimar Republic and how it operates, with the President and the Chancellor and the Reichstag. Some of the positives of it, with the fact that it's a democratic system, or a very democratic system, but also some weaknesses in that actually it's almost kind of too democratic, and you never end up with a majority government, and you never end up with decisions being made, or rarely end up with decisions being made. Okay, so I'm going to be making a few more videos over the next week or so on the Germany topic. Next one is going to be about Gustav Stresemann, the work of Gustav Stresemann. Year 11, you should know who he is and what he did. Year 10, you've just started looking at this, and we'll carry on looking at it after half term. But I hope the revision is going well, and I hope at the same time you're having a really nice half term. Once again, I'll leave the comment section open below. If you have any requests for any videos on Germany, or on the civil rights topic, or on the First World War topic, please leave your suggestions there, and I'll see what I can do in terms of making some more videos on those areas too. But again, I hope you have a lovely half term. Keep revising, but also have a nice break at the same time. And I will see you all very soon. Thank you.